there's an engineer named John Fields who worked with Miley Cyrus and the Jonas Brothers and all these people. And we're like, get us a new version of that song for the commercial. And they're so quick about it because they've been playing it so long that Fields, who's amazing at what he does, is like, well, you got any more songs? We got the studio the whole day. Dollyrots ended up recording an entire record with Fields for free at Studio A. Wow. Capitol Records building, right? In the early 2000s when American Idol came out, we're all so bitter about that show. It's like, gee, like, you got a kid who's like, you've been out there grinding it for years trying to get this, trying to get the attention. Some kid from nowhere who, yes, can sing, and that's great. And they're up there on stage. They don't even know what to do with the crowd because they don't have no experience. My idiot friends that were doing it with me, I go in the locker room and they're all getting wasted in the locker room and like jumping in the pool. I'm like, you idiots. Like, you're going to get so much trouble. Because I knew they were going to get busted. You know what I mean? So, of course they did, where the Doors had played forever. There's the Viper Room, all these famous venues. Well, they didn't really care about the music anymore. All they cared about was the money. So they're booking bands, but they're booking like, and I'm eclectic all over listening to music, but they were booking like a hardcore band, a hardcore metal band with a punk band with like a reggae band, and it just wasn't cohesive, right? So what would happen was the one band would bring all their fans in, they would watch that band, and then you're like getting set up to play after. You're like, oh, there's a pretty good crowd here. And then when that band would finish, all their people would leave, and then your people would come in, and then they watch your show, and then all your people would leave, and then a whole new. So it was just this crazy like flow, like wave of people all night. And the clubs loved it because they're selling all those tickets because people are coming and going and they're making, but as a band, it sucked because you're like, well, this is no fun. Like there's no scene, there's no cohesiveness, there's no like, you don't feel like you're a part of thing. You just feel like you're manufacturing these shows.
Well, anyways, Chris, how's everything going?
Good, man. Good. Thank you for having me. How are you?
Of course, I'm doing great. And as you're talking about before, I absolutely love the background of your in your office. It's really
Yeah.
cool to see all the work that you've put in with the Dollyrots Bang Sugar Bang. Looks like you've had a lot of fun working on these projects, man.
Yeah, it's been awesome. And as I was mentioning before we froze previously, it's funny while you're in the middle of doing everything, you don't a lot of the stuff doesn't end up in a place because first of all you're on the road all the time and you don't have much of a home base until you have like a studio you put stuff in. But I was like always embarrassed to put it up, and then I got older and after I realized the adventure that I had and how cool it actually was, because I think when you're in it you don't realize you're so worried about like what the next steps are and what you're going to get done and where you're going that you don't enjoy what you're in as much. And so after I kind of took a step back, I was able to be like, all right, I should be proud of this. I'm going to put it on my walls.
That's interesting. So it wasn't
So
until years after, like after you've gone on tour, after you've been doing this for a while, until you finally felt some kind of pride in the work you've done.
yeah, isn't that funny? So
Yeah.
I always felt pride and I always felt really good about what I did, but I didn't showcase it like
Ah,
I should have. Do you know what I'm saying?
yeah,
Like I used to think it was weird to like put up all my stuff from all the time that I had, but then the more removed I got from it, the more special I realized it was, and then I was more like, you know what, I should totally I should embrace it. So
yeah,
that's what I
that
did.
makes sense. I mean, I guess I
Yeah.
could kind of feel the same way when I started the podcast too. Like I wouldn't be posting it everywhere just when it's getting started, but I guess with as time goes on, I guess you start to realize kind of what you've created, and then you feel, I guess you said pride wasn't the word, but you feel like it's a good time to kind of showcase it and
Yeah. Yeah.
put it out. Yeah,
Yep.
it's interesting.
Definitely always been proud of the work I did, but finally got to a point where I didn't feel like I was bragging or trying to show off or something. You know what I mean? Just something weird. Like you just,
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
I'm
well,
old now and I should just
yeah.
be like, that's good. I'm 47. I should be happy. I should be proud of myself.
You also used the word embarrassment before. So is that
Yeah.
something you felt like on tour or like in the process of making this?
So no, it was always embarrassing. So I'll tell you what's embarrassing. So tour always felt absolutely perfect. Like it was being on the road and being on tour and playing shows is like heaven on earth. It was the greatest place to be on the planet when I was younger, right? You just didn't, it was so fun. You were on the road, you're with your best friends and you're making music and you're meeting people and and just having this crazy adventure. So that I was never embarrassed, and believe it or not, never really nervous. The bigger the crowd, the less nervous I was, because the bigger the crowd is, the more you can control them, believe it or not. When it's an intimate crowd, then you can get nervous because it's like two or three people you're making eye contact with,
Yeah.
right? And so I remember like I don't get nervous for like going up on stage and playing a show with my drums, but I would get nervous having to speak to like my daughter's kindergarten class or something. It's totally ridiculous and backwards. Um, but it wasn't really embarrassment. It was more like it's hard to explain when you're in the middle of working so hard on stuff and you're super proud of it, but it's you just don't showcase your. I guess it's because I was in the moment. I was just in the moment, and I was collecting all these adventures and all these memories, and then I guess after I stepped away from it, I was like, I need to save these memories. I need to keep them alive. So
That makes sense. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you're so wrapped up into the whole scene of you're going on tour, you're driving all across the country. I mean, that must be so much. I mean, I know you describe it as having a lot of fun, being on an adventure, but I'm sure at times it can get overwhelming too, and you don't have, I
yeah.
guess, time to process like what's actually happening to me.
Yeah, I missed a lot of family get-togethers and birthdays, and you miss a lot of stuff because you're always on the road, right? And then it's weird because did you ever see the movie Groundhog Day with Bill Murray?
I don't think I've seen it now.
It's an old one, but it's classic. It's like a 90s movie, and it's really he's in this place to report on a Groundhog Day event, but he keeps waking up every morning on the same day until he gets it right. But the joke is like tour is like that Groundhog Day movie because you wake up every day and you do the exact same thing you did the day before, but you're just doing it in a different town. And I don't know if you've ever heard the joke where the musician doesn't know where they are, and they say thank you to the wrong town. And people are
Yeah.
like, how do you not know where you are? It's because you have, especially when you have a bus driver driving you from place to place, you don't know where you are. It all looks the same. You're in a green room backstage, and that is your space. Like that's what you're used to and you're comfortable with. So it could be anywhere in the world. It doesn't matter. You're still in your same zone and you're doing the same thing you do every night. You're just doing it in a different place. So like we'd be on tour to have to look at my laminate and be like, oh, we're in, this is where we are. Let me see if I have hang on, I got some laminates. This is fun.
Yeah, for sure.
There we go. We got some laminates here.
Ooh, nice.
But anyway, I'll find it. Hang on. So one was, let's see. Okay, here's a good one. All right, I'm old, so I have to put reading glasses on. I'm 47 now. So we went out on tour with a band called Buzzcocks, who are
Okay.
awesome. They're from England.
So you guys went together?
Yep. So they're the headliner, and we were the direct support. They're a really awesome band from England, and oh my god, I was a huge fan of theirs forever. And then they asked us on tour, which was amazing. So
Wow.
so this one, so you can see there's the list of shows.
That's insane.
Right. On that tour. So you're like, okay, I'm in Washington, D.C. Great. It's May 11th. I'm in Washington, D.C. And then you're like, all right, I was in Detroit last night. Where am I today? Oh, I'm in Chicago today. Okay.
You wake up in the morning, you figure out where you gotta be.
Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Maryland, New York, New York, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Farmingdale, New York, Boston, Massachusetts, Montreal, Toronto, Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago, Minneapolis, Winnipeg,
Wow.
Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver, Portland, Seattle, Oakland, Los Angeles, Anaheim, San Diego, Austin, Dallas, and San Antonio.
How'd you
That
find the
was
stamina to keep up with all that?
right. I know. Well, and imagine being on tour, like, that being your daily life. Like,
Yeah.
it's pretty crazy.
Wow. That's
Oh yeah,
amazing.
here, I'll go for one more here. Ready?
Yeah.
This one was fun because this was a UK tour. So
Cool.
this was with Bowling for Soup. So this was I don't know if you know that band or if you like them or not,
Yeah.
but so this was, and then you wear these, right? You wear these credentials so that everywhere you go, they know you're with the band, right?
Hmm.
Um Cambridge Corn Exchange in Cambridge, UK, Bristol, Exeter, Plymouth, Nottingham, Southampton, London, Birmingham, Manchester, Norwich, Leeds, Glasgow, Aberdeen, Glasgow, Scotland, Aberdeen, Scotland, Newcastle, Liverpool, Sheffield, Dublin, Ireland, and Belfast, Ireland. So that was 18 shows in 18 days.
Wow.
Not a single night off.
That's insane.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah. So I would imagine it get repetitive at times, but more than repetitive, do you feel like it was overwhelming at any point, or were you able to just embrace it and enjoy it the whole time?
So the most overwhelming thing about it, most of the time you're just having a blast, right? The most overwhelming thing about it, I think, were the highs and the lows, because especially like at a band our size. So I always joke we were like notable, right? Like people knew who we were, and we were out there and we were on the radio and people could hear us. We weren't top 40 or anything, but we had our fans. So, but there would be shows where it's like you're on a highest of high, where you're opening in England for 3,000 people with Bowling for Soup. And then another tour, you're like in Piqua, Ohio, and three people show up to your show, and you're in this weird bar where you're like, why did anyone book us here? And then you're like, what am I doing with my life? You know, you're just, there's nights where there are nights when you're on tour and it doesn't go well. You don't, most of the time it's because not enough people showed up, right?
Right.
We would always play exactly the same show, no matter who showed up. We would put in the same amount of energy to it every time. We would play the same show. We wouldn't get up there and sulk because only, five or six people showed up
And
that
those are also
were
the
quite
moments
generous.
you felt nervous too, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But we'd always play a good show. And it's nerve-wracking, especially when you're playing for six people, because they're like, who are these people and why are they playing, And but every night you play the same show, but that's when it gets emotional, when you start wondering what you're doing with your life, when you feel like you can't you 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 advertise that you're going to be in a town. You're telling everybody over and over, hey, we're going to be in Chicago on this day, blah blah blah. This day we're going to be in Chicago, and then we usually had good crowds in Chicago. But then inevitably, someone would reach you on social media and be like, hey, when's the next time you're in Chicago? And we're like, we just played there 2 days ago. You know what I mean? Like, you wanted us to come there, you didn't pay enough attention to get there. And so it's the ups and downs of like feeling like you're on top of the world, and then feeling like what am I doing with my life, and how
Mm.
am I going to keep going? Right?
Yeah. That's an interesting feeling for sure. Like that, it kind of comes randomly, I'm sure. That what am I doing with my life? And I mean,
Yep.
do you know like what kind of triggered that emotion? Like, was there something specific that would make you feel like, why am I here? Like, maybe why am I not at home right now? Or is there like somewhere else in those moments I felt like you wanted to be here?
Yeah, yeah, like why shouldn't why am I out here doing this right now? Um Yeah, again, most of the time it would be like you'd get really good news. Like I remember on that Buzzcocks tour, we were in we were in Canada, and I remember we had we'd gotten a call. So there's a band called Screeching Weasel that we love. And I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but they
Oh,
started Screeching Weasel came from Lookout Records, which is where the Dollyrots first record came out on Lookout Records. And when
right,
I
yeah.
was a teenager, I listened to everything on Lookout Records. Like I listened to everything on Lookout and everything on Fat, and at Fat Records it's called. And they were both out of California. One Fat Records was San Francisco, and Lookout was Berkeley, California. But that's where Green Day came from, was Lookout
Right.
Records, their first two records. And so I worshiped that label. And then lo and behold, I ended up in the Dollyrots. Our first record ended up coming out on a subsidiary of Lookout called Panic Button, right? And Panic Button was created by a guy named Ben Weasel, who is the lead singer and guitar player for a band called Screeching Weasel out of Chicago, who I loved since I was a teenager. Like they're amazing. So we were on tour with Buzzcocks, and we got a call saying, hey, Screeching Weasel's getting back together. They're doing a small tour, and they want you to open for them in LA. And that was like one of the highlights, because I've been obsessed with that band forever. And in fact, to a point where I went to an Earth Day concert one year when I was like 15 with my high school band, because we heard Screeching Weasel was supposed to be there and play. And there were a lot of other cool bands, but we were there for Screeching Weasel. And it turns out it was a rumor that they weren't actually going to be there, and so we were super disappointed. So I'd never even got to see him live. And then next thing you know, I'm like in a band that's on Lookout, and Ben Weasel is calling us and asking us to open for him. So it was pretty cool. Here, I'll show you the
Yeah.
this was the poster from the show.
Oh, wow. That's nice. Yeah, I've
Yeah,
never heard of the Screeching Weasels, unfortunately. I'll check them out.
they're really cool. These are all like punk bands that are just fun
Yeah.
punk, fun
Yeah.
punk kind of stuff. But
What kind of music do they make? It's more like groovy kind of then, or
they're like real fast punk.
fast
Like
punk?
yeah, I don't have my Alexa on. Otherwise, I'd tell her to play something for you. But listen to them. They're like snot. They're like snotty punk. I know that sounds weird, but it's like
Okay.
give them a listen. They're really good. They're fast, like fast drums, really cool guitars, quick stuff, and then kind of whiny vocals. I know that sounds weird. Not whiny in a bad way, but like snotty, like punk vocals. There's a
Nice.
band called No Effects, and they're the ones that own Fat Records or that started Fat Records, and they have that kind of snotty kind of approach too, where they sing, but their music's they're super like super crunchy, tight
Yeah.
guitars, and they're a great band. Great
Amazing.
band.
Yeah.
So,
So, what was it like when you first got that record deal?
oh man, so that is that is if you're a musician in a band, especially in the days like so this was the early 2000s when we were starting out, right? So the 90s and 2000s, like everything was about like getting a record deal. Like that's all you think about, especially in Los Angeles where we were based. It's like every band put together, and you're gonna laugh, but Bang Sugar Bang, we had a song on one of our records called Major Label Interest because we used to laugh because we'd meet bands and they'd be like, oh yeah, we're good, we've got some major label interest, like Universal or whoever it is interested in potentially putting out the record. So we wrote a song kind of torching the people that would say that, but I mean that's like there's all these steps to being in a band, right? So you start a band in high school and all you want to do is just play shows with your friends. And then you get a little older and you're like, oh, maybe we can go on tour. And then that's the dream. And then you're on tour, like you save up a bunch of your own money and you jump in a van and you go on tour with your friends and you pay for everything out of your own pocket, right? And then the next dream is, all right, we're in a van and trailer and we're getting gigs and we're getting guaranteed money. It's called guarantees. And now the band is paying for everything. And I don't have to pay for my food and I don't have to pay for my drumsticks. And so then you get to that level. And then from there, at that level, even you're like, we're sleeping in on couches and people's punk houses and all that kind of stuff. And then eventually it was like next level is like, oh, we have a fan who works for Comfort Inns and could get us a deal. So now we're sleeping, and believe me, between Econo Lodge and Quality Inns, going from that to Comfort Inn is a big difference in the comfort of the bed. I guarantee you. Like Econo Lodges and Quality Inns are the beds are and the sheets are awful. And then you get into a Comfort Inn and you're like, oh my god, it's so soft and so nice. Um, so then you get to that point, and then like the the next step is like I'm on a bus. Like if you get to go out on tour on a bus, that was in my in our heyday. It was like the bus was like the end all be all. Like I'm on a bus and I'm on tour with a big band, and so that was all kind of like the hierarchy of it, obviously. And somewhere along the way, before you get to the bus, the goal is to get the record label so that they start paying for stuff for you, so you don't have to, right?
Well, yeah, I
But
think I'd imagine it'd be hard to grow and like get on the map without having a record label at that
you,
era.
you definitely in back in the late 90s and the early 2000s it wasn't as easy. So it's interesting today because you don't see as many bands that get huge and get and explode into this mega bands, but bands have way more options to find their fans now. So you're finding a lot of smaller bands having more success because they're able to connect directly with their fans. And so they're not funneling money through a label or through other avenues that usually take money from the labels
Mhm.
or from the bands. So if you picture like a wagon wheel, right? And you got the hub of the wagon wheel and there's all those big spokes going out. The band is the hub of the wagon wheel. And every spoke going out to the edge of the wheel is you handing money to somebody to do something for your band, right? So
Yes.
so manager gets paid, lawyer gets paid, label gets paid, publisher gets paid, and you're making all this money, but yet you're still like getting Taco Bell for lunch every day on tour because like you're
Yeah.
bringing in a ton of money, but everybody's siphoning it from you because everybody that works to try to get you where you want to be. And
Mhm.
it's true, you want to have that team because they get you more exposure to have that team, right? So it's like bittersweet because it's like, all right, I got the team, but now we got the label, and the label can front us cash, and the label can do these things for us, but they're keeping track of every dollar they spend on us, and we're paying them back with record sales, right? So
Yeah.
so the label pays to send you into the studio to make a record, and they keep track of every dime it costs, and then when they release that record and sell it, you don't get any royalties or any money from it until they've recouped what they've invested in it, right?
Yeah.
So you hear about these bands in the 80s and the 70s who'd get these major label deals and they're ordering sushi and lobster and they're just like living it up. And then everyone wonders why they're broke in the end. And it's like, well, because you had to pay for the lobster in the end. You know what I mean? Like the
Yeah.
labels, they all got super rich and you got what was left.
Yeah, I've heard so many stories of even popular bands today that originally have been screwed over by record labels because I think that when you're a young band, the naivety of being so desperate to be put on the map and growing could that's very easy to get into a bad deal with a record label. And I've heard so many
100%.
stories of people with that situation.
It's too easy to say yes because you want that, and to compromise certain things, so um there's some people that didn't care and did it all the way up to the top, like Madonna. Even like Madonna talked about how she didn't care, she would do whatever it took to make it big time. But there's other bands that are like, I'm not playing that song, that you get invited to go play on a talk show or something, and they want you to play your hit song, and they're like, I'm not playing that song, and it's like, well, that's kind of why you're here. Like that's the song everyone wants to hear. So
Yeah. But I
it's
think
a,
that
it's a hard situation to be in.
it is definitely very difficult, but I think the era that we live in now is so different than the other era with digital music because I
Yeah.
think that, as you said, there's so many different avenues for a band or an artist to be able to access some kind of fan network with social media platforms and YouTube and streaming, that I guess it's so much easier now for an artist to get their music out there and even grow naturally from a lot of like platforms like TikTok. So I think that this era of music is very different.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it's so interesting that I remember in the late 2000s. So not to get long-winded, but like when we're in our band and we're out there like huffing it and like grinding show after show after show, right? When we started the band in LA, we practiced every night of the week. We were in the studio
Wow.
practicing. And our philosophy was get something recorded so when we play shows we have something to give people to take with them, right? And so then you're scheduling shows at the beginning, and your friends are all coming to the shows as support, and you're like, thank you for coming. And then eventually your friends are like, okay, I've gone to every show. But if you're good, all of a sudden you're like, oh, all these other people are coming that I don't know. And you start building a fan base, and you're like, holy cow, this is amazing. I'm actually do something. So what we did there was, I'm getting long-winded, but we got to a point where we're like, we are going to play every night of the week in LA if we can. We played every show we possibly could, and the idea was we're going to build a network. We're going to meet other bands that we're kind of jive with, and it's all about producing and marketing yourself, right? So you're out there every night getting your name in the paper and playing shows and getting your name in the marquee and all that stuff. Um, but the so in the early 2000s when American Idol came out, we were all so bitter about that show. As like, gee, like you got a kid who's like, you've been out there grinding it for years trying to get this, trying to get the attention, and then you get some kid from nowhere who, yes, can sing, and that's great, but they basically put through the meat factory of stardom. Like they put them through boot camp for being a star, and they're up there on stage. They don't even know what to do with the crowd because they don't have no experience. They just don't, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I've
They're
seen.
like up there doing what they think a rock star should do rather than honestly reacting to what they're doing, if that makes sense. Like you can see it when you have people performing, even people that are big and have big crowds now, that they're not genuine. Like they're just doing what they think that rock stars do on a stage instead of like actually like realistically reacting to their own music. So the mid 2000s were an interesting time because when the streaming started coming out, labels didn't know what to do. I mean, obviously with Napster and all that stuff, if you remember that stuff, that freaked out all the labels because everybody's starting to get everything for free, right?
Mhm.
And then Apple Music comes out, and they start coming up with ways to like actually buy. Not even Apple Music; it was called iTunes, right? You could
Right.
buy songs for 99 cents. So that was helpful, and but the labels are still freaking out because they're like, the old formula is not the same anymore. You can't just sign a band and promote them and put a record out and make a ton of money because people start streaming and the songs for free, and then you're not getting the same kind of royalties. They're not getting the same kind of album sales. So then what do you do? Well, then you got to put your band out on tour more, right? So then the label's like, well, we can't just take money from your album sales. We got to take money from your tour and from
And
your merch,
merch.
and
Yeah.
and they call it 360-degree deals. They started
Yeah, I've heard
offering
about this.
360-degree deals where they're like, oh yeah, it's not just about the recordings anymore. We're going to take a portion of everything you do as a band.
Wow.
Which, did it work for a little? It probably worked for some people, and other people tell you, 10% or whatever you're getting, whatever you get. Let's say you get 50% of what you're making, and 50% is going out to your team, and 50% is actually going to the band. 50% is zero zero, right? So imagine you just want to play and you just want to be in a band and you don't have to worry about anything but playing music and writing music. You gonna take 50%, and of actual real money, or are you gonna like stick to your guns and be like, I'm not playing the kind of music that sells because I don't want to, I'm not compromising my value. You're like, well, you're gonna be broke for a very long time. You're gonna be a
Right.
starving artist for a long time.
Yeah.
So you have to find that balance in there. But labels were scared in the mid 2000s because when we put out our the Dollyrots album, it's called Because I'm Awesome. Um, to a little backstory, I talked about Lookout Records. So Lookout Records was released the first Dollyrots album. So where this came from was, this is a crazy story. So when I was in Bang Sugar Bang, we had started playing LA, and like I mentioned, we were building the brand and everything. And we started going to shows where we would meet other bands that we really liked and wanted to play with. And then we started a night there called Kiss or Kill. We started it was a whole scene it ended up being. And we called it Kiss or Kill. And the idea was Hollywood had become this kind of factory where bands would play. They would put bands on the bill at a place. There were all these venues. There was one called the Gig on Melrose. There was the Whiskey A Go Go, which where the Doors had played forever. There's the Viper Room. All these famous venues. Well, they didn't really care about the music anymore. All they cared about was the money. So they're booking bands, but they're booking like, and I'm eclectic all over at listening to music, but they were booking like a hardcore band, a hardcore metal band with a punk band with like a reggae band, and it just wasn't cohesive, right?
Yeah.
So what would happen was the one band would bring all their fans in. They would watch that band, and then you're like getting set up to play after. You're like, oh, there's a pretty good crowd here. And then when that band would finish, all their people would leave, and then your people would come in, and then they watch your show, and then all your people would leave, and then a whole new. So it was just this crazy like flow, like wave of people all night. And the clubs loved it because they're selling all those tickets because people are coming and going and they're making,
Right.
but as a band, it sucked because you're like, well, this is no fun. Like there's no scene, there's no cohesiveness, there's no like, you don't feel like you're a part of thing. You just feel like you're manufacturing these shows. So long story short, we got sick of it. We started meeting other bands, and we are like, hey, why don't you come play this night? And so the Kiss or Kill night became this like anti-Hollywood thing where it was, we didn't do it at a venue on Sunset where you had to pay a bunch of money to park and your drinks were 10 to 12 bucks. This was back in the mid 2000s, so that was a lot of money for a drink then. They were even like 14 bucks even. um we started doing it in like Silver Lake and East Hollywood and all these places where these cheap little venues didn't care, and you could go in and get a $2 Corona. And we had a guy that would MC the shows, named Rob Z was his name, and he would walk around with a squirt gun full of tequila and he'd spray it in people's mouths like as you're going. But we would, if you showed up early, you'd get in for free, or you get in for a buck or two. And then you get drink specials, and then if you stayed late, you'd get drink specials at the end of the night. So it was encouraging people to come early, stay for all the bands, and then leave at the end of the night. And it became this whole scene where everybody became it was this little family that just grew and grew and grew and grew, and then all of a sudden it grew into this huge thing that we didn't have any control over anymore. And then, and like every good scene, it always dies. That one eventually died. But the idea there is like, is finding an ally and finding and trying to work together rather than being in competition with other bands. So I think, okay, I'm sorry that I'm so long and winding on this, but the story was, I was in Bang Sugar Bang. We met the Dollyrots, and we were like, you guys are awesome. Come play Kiss or Kill. So that's how we started getting to know the Dollyrots. So then our first tour is Bang Sugar Bang, and the first Dollyrots tour was Bang Sugar Bang and the Dollyrots together, right? And they had their drummer Josh. Dollyrots had their drummer Josh. So we traveled the country in a van together, in a like a conversion van with a trailer. So there were six of us in there, and had a blast. And we would play all these shows together. And Dollyrots were getting some traction. They had booked a commercial for Hewlett Packard. So someone at one of their shows had seen them, and the Dollyrots were super cute and easy to promote. And someone had seen them, and they submitted them for this commercial, and Hewlett Packard loved them and booked them on this commercial. And the idea was, they're like a garage band and they're playing in their band, and you're like, Hewlett Packard's saying we're making it happen. So whatever it is. So they booked the show, but they wanted the commercial people wanted them to re-record the song to give them a different kind of more raw version of this song that they had called "Feed Me, Pet Me." So in order to do that, they booked out time at Studio A in the Capitol Records building in LA, which is like this famous building where the
Yeah.
Beatles recorded, right? And this was before I was in the Dollyrots. So the Dollyrots go into the Capitol Records building. There's an engineer slash producer in there named John Fields who worked with Miley Cyrus and the Jonas Brothers and all these people that the commercial people had hired him for the day, and were like, get us a new version of that song for the commercial, right? So they record it, and they're so quick about it because they've been playing it so long that Fields, who's amazing at what he does, is like, well, you got any more songs? We got the studio the whole day. So Dollyrots ended up recording an entire record with Fields for free at Studio
Wow.
A, the Capitol
Wow.
Records building, right? So that's where that started happening, and then of course Lookout Records came and picked it up, and then they put it out and distributed it.
Wow. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's really a cool story, and
Yeah.
so the story there was I forget what the question was because I went so far off the
Okay.
off the deep end here, but that's the idea of where it just starts, and it starts to snowball, right? You
Yeah.
just like anybody will tell you, what is it, like 10,000 hours of doing something makes you a perfect, and makes you an expert on it or whatever. And so the idea was like, we're just going to play and play and play and play and meet people and do everything we possibly can, and then all of a sudden one day you look at yourself and you're like, oh my God, I'm a pro. Like, I remember sound checking at the Whiskey A Go Go when we had the first chance to play the whiskey. They used to have a play to pay pattern where these promoters would take advantage of bands and make them sell tickets. And if they didn't sell every ticket, then the band just had to pay for whatever was left. So we wouldn't play the whiskey under those circumstances. We finally got invited to play the whiskey without the pay to play. And I'm sound checking, and we've been playing so many punk venues, I didn't even have like monitors half the time. So I'm getting a sound check, and I remember feeling like I'm a total like imposter. Like they're gonna know I'm just like a fake and blah blah. And I remember that feeling of sound checking and feeling like a total imposter. And then, years later, being on tour and sound checking every night and being like, I need more of this in my ear, and I need this, and I need this, and I need her voice, and I need and then being like, holy shit, I'm a professional. I when did this happen? Like
Yeah.
all of a sudden you're like, okay, I get why people sound check. I get why people have green rooms. When you're
Yeah.
starting out, you're excited about a green room and you're excited about sound check because it seems like a big deal. But then you realize as you grow, it's just another tool that you need to be successful, right?
I think it's incredible how you were able to maintain the authenticity and the vision the whole time. Because I think their story with their Kiss or Kill nights is really cool because you literally saw that this performing with all these different bands, like I feel like I'm just being milked for money. I'm not really able to present my art in the way I want to present it. And you kind of start this thing with a small vision, but you're able to find other people who agree with that vision, believe in that vision, and slowly grow this whole program. So I think that's absolutely incredible how you're able to build that.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, that's yeah, and it's crazy. All good things come out of that, I think. Because you have the people that are making art and doing something original and something new. And not that we were doing anything original and new. We were anti-system, right? Because what had happened is the Hollywood system had come to a point where all these promoters existed to take advantage of bands. They didn't exist because they loved music and wanted to grow a scene, right? So, okay, so do we rely on the promoters? I don't know if I might have said producers. I meant promoters. Do we rely on these promoters who are taking advantage of bands, or are we just going to do this ourselves? And you'll hear it like right now, like especially now, people who are making movies and doing stuff on YouTube. They're like, I wasn't going to wait around for somebody to come and pay me to do this. I just did it. I just started shooting, and then the next thing you know, they've got 1 million followers on YouTube, and it's like, good for you. What's stopping you from just doing it? Like, just do it. You don't have to rely on corrupt promoters in order to do what you got to do. Like, take it into your own hands and do your own thing, and make it work. And that's where good art comes from too, because it's like you said, it's genuine. It's coming from an artistic vision rather than a
Right.
monetizing, you know.
Well, it does bring up an interesting question because you mentioned before that you don't want to become the broke artist. And I mean, we do agree that money is important, but at the same time, I've seen so many either in all domains of art. Like music is a great example. We've heard of so many artists that start off so well with such a good vision, but then when you start making music just to get to see what hits, what the record label wants, what will generate the most money, they sort of lose the art, and the fans can kind of hear that too. And I think about what that with the podcast a lot too. Like right now, every episode, I love the way I do it. I love my style of doing it. I love how creative it is and how I'm able to just really dig into someone's life and have a natural conversation. But when I start to see success start to come because of me doing a very specific thing, like what if I deviate from the art of it? What if I start chasing what will build this into more of a money-making machine than an artistic machine? So I wonder, like, how do you believe you can draw that balance in any form of art, keeping that art alive, but
Yeah.
also like we don't want to just be sitting around as a broke artist at the same time.
Totally. But and it comes down to like it comes down to your own I don't want to say grit. Like it comes down to your I guess how strong of a character you have, I would say. People always talk about like you always see these jokes in movies where you see somebody that comes to LA and they're like, "Oh, Los Angeles is gonna chew you up," and it's true because you get people that go there that just don't get it. Like I always used to say this because my old bandmate used to host a karaoke night in Hollywood, which was really fun. But you would get some really talented people, and then you would get people that were absolutely like had no idea how bad they were, but thought they were the greatest, and just needed to say to them, "This is not your thing. Like you're not gonna make it from this." But I used to say like I think the difference between like a professional, as far as in the like entertainment industry and performance industry, the difference between it's like there's the people that want to be, that aspire, that want to be there, which is fine. Everybody starts out there. But I think the switch comes from do you take it from a place of admiration and you're enamored with something and you switch it from being enamored with it to owning it and becoming it? Or are you always just around it being like excited about being near it and never feeling like it's yours and like you don't actually own it? Because you can't be successful unless you own it and you understand. You know what I'm saying? There were so many people in Hollywood that wanted to be around it and wanted to be in movies, but they put it up so high on a pedestal that they were never going to achieve success because they couldn't feel like they owned it, is what I'm trying to say. I don't know if that makes sense, but
As in that they owned it. As,
they're always just too it's like when you have a crush on someone and you can you have such a crush on them that you can barely talk to them and you just want to
right.
be near them but you can't even. That's what a lot of people in the entertainment industry would be. They wanted to be around it and they wanted to be famous, but
Oh, I see.
they were so in awe of it
They
that
kind of make it into, yeah.
they were fans of it. They weren't artists themselves.
So
You know what I'm saying?
they make it seem as if it's this big magical fantasy kind of thing, and they make it seem so big in their head that it almost seems impossible to achieve it at that point.
100%.
Yeah.
They basically they're drawing a line between them and what they want. And how are you going to cross the line if you don't understand that and like believe that you deserve it and you should be there? You know what I
And
mean?
you also brought up the other point of like the delusion that people are in, but they associate themselves so much with their music that they almost can't even look at it in third person. And then that gets
Yeah,
difficult because how do you take criticism at that point?
right.
Yeah.
Right. But
Well,
so my point being like you have those people and the first chance that someone like so anyone gets a whiff of being able to make money off of somebody like that, number one, they're going to sell themselves out immediately and do whatever it takes. And then number two, probably going to be pretty miserable in the long run. Do you know what I
right.
mean? Like
Yeah.
it's going to be I just think when you talk to bands and when I think about what we did and I had such an adventure and I feel lucky because I got a taste of both worlds. We were big enough where we experienced some really serious excitement and like the business, like the business side of things that seems so glamorous and all that stuff. We got to experience that, but we didn't have to live with it for too long. Like when you think about the bands out there that are humongous like the Green Days of the world and U2s and the like they are glamorous. That's their, even though it's a grind for them too, but their lives are entwined. Like they have no other option. If they did anything else with their lives, they're gonna end up being on TMZ with someone being like, Billy Joe from Green Day is parking cars now, and then there are people, oh, what happened to him? And it's like nothing,
Right.
dude. Like he's a real person. But so I feel grateful that I got to have this run and feel like I know what it's like to be a rock star and have that experience, but to be able to walk away from it and be like, okay, I'm good. I can go do something else now. Because so many musicians can't. They don't know what they would do outside of it, and I don't think they can function that way. Um, but like the artistic integrity thing, getting back to that, I apologize. It's such a fine line because you get tempted, and my point of that is being like you think about the days where you're in the rehearsal space and it's just the beginning and you're writing these new songs and you're so excited and you're bonding as a band, and you think back on how amazing that time was. And then you think once everybody starts getting involved with like lawyers and labels and all that kind of stuff, and then it kind of takes the joy out of it a little bit. So then you have to kind of figure out how to dance around that. And then you get to a point where you're so famous, like Joan Jett, who we were associated with from the Blackheart label, that everywhere she goes, somebody wants something from her. So how do you live your life when everybody you meet, you don't know if they're genuinely like, they just want something. Everyone wants something from you. Like, can you imagine living that? Like,
That world is scary.
yeah, it would be scary. So that's stardom right there. That's a scary thing. And when you hear all these interviews about people who are like, yeah, we were just this little band and then we got huge and then we broke up,
Right.
like the behind the music, like they end up miserable.
Yeah, they're mentally
It's
insane. A lot of them end up being
yeah.
insane. I mean, it's
Oh
it's
yeah, for
sad to
sure.
see it. I think Nirvana is a great example. I guess they kind of blew up out of nowhere with, and then Kurt Cobain the following years kind of just went insane, and it was
Yeah.
I feel like that for anyone is so hard to deal with. Kind of when it sneaks up on you because I think a lot of people even when they start bands there are definitely a lot of people who really dream about making it successful, but a lot of people also do it as a hobby. So and a lot of the bands that are successful today started off as just hobbies, and then I
Yeah.
can only imagine what it would feel like all of a sudden being put out there with the entire world judging you and like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, you think about Nirvana, how quickly they rose. Like they were a punk band. They were touring. So I live here in Madison, Wisconsin, and they demoed their Nirvana Nevermind record here in Madison with a guy named Butch Vig, who had a studio called Smart Studios. Butch Vig's in Garbage with Shirley Manson. There's a band called Garbage, and he's a Madison guy. And so he had Smart Studios, and Nirvana was coming through on tour, and they planned like an extra week to stay here, and they recorded all their demos for Nevermind, and they ended up going and finishing the record out in California at Sound. Oh God, what is it called? The Sound Fact. There was a Van Nuys.
Soundgarden?
Uh, Soundgarden is the
That's a band.
band.
That's a band, yeah.
So the studio that Nirvana finished Nevermind in is in Van Nuys, California, and it was called this. I can't remember. We recorded a song there, and I can't
Oh
remember
yeah.
the damn name of it anymore.
It's all right.
Um, and it has all this history, of course. But you think like Kurt Cobain, he was a troubled kid who music helped him feel better, and he just wanted to do music, and then all of a sudden it became so big he couldn't even control it, right?
Yeah.
And he had all these
That's
other
it.
issues too. I think it sounds
Yeah.
like he had some pain issues and stuff, but like Dave Grohl seems pretty normal for the most part for coming out of all that, um, but yeah, to go overnight from just being able to do your thing, and then all of a sudden you can't even go to the grocery store without people bothering you or wanting. Can you imagine that energy of someone constantly being so enamored with you that they just want something from you, and it's not even anything other than like, I just want you to say hi to me, or I want you to look at me, and you're like, that's gotta mess with your head too.
Yeah.
Like, how do
I can imagine
you?
a world like that.
I can't either.
Yeah.
We got to we. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go first. It's fine.
Well, I was just gonna say we got to. I had a night where I got to sit down at a table with Dave Grohl after a show
Oh,
one time at the Roxy. So at the Roxy on Sunset Strip, there's a place above there called On the Rocks, or yeah, it's called On the Rocks, and it was like a VIP spot up above the Roxy where if you were lucky enough, you'd get in there. And so we played shows there, and so we got to go up there afterwards. And one of my buddies was in a band. There was a band called The Knives that had done really well. They were touring with a band called CKY for a while, and they'd gotten some good notoriety. Anyway, my buddy Johnny's awesome. So I went up there with him, and somehow CKY, I guess, knew Dave Grohl. So I'm sitting at the table up there having drinks, and the next thing I know, Dave Grohl sits down with us in our booth, and we're like having drinks with Dave Grohl. And it was about the time. This would have been like 2009, 2008. It was right around the time when he was having his first kid, and he hadn't had his kid yet. And he's like drinking with us, and he goes, "You guys, I'm gonna be a dad. Like, is that like I don't even know what I'm gonna do?" And I'm like sitting here thinking, "Oh my god, having drinks with, I'm having drinks with with Dave Grohl." And he's like a normal human. He's freaking out about being a dad, and he was just a totally normal guy who
Yeah.
just has this huge career that everybody knows of.
Yeah,
So,
that's really interesting point because we kind of treat them almost as if they're not human.
right.
But when you really get to talk to them or hear them speak on a podcast or something, you really get to see the humanity in them, and that must be such a
Yeah.
special feeling.
Do you listen to Smartless by any chance
I
with Jason
don't
Bateman?
know.
It's Jason Bateman, Sean Hayes, and Will Arnett.
Okay.
Three guys. They're older. Like again, I'm 47, so they're older. But they interview tons of people. They had Bono on from U2,
Hmm.
and Bono is this personality. When he's playing, he's like this crazy personality. I don't know how into U2 you are, but they interviewed him on the podcast, and I was like, "Who is this guy? Like this normal." He's talking like a normal, like you're like, "Oh my god, he could be my neighbor." Like I could be having
Yeah.
a conversation with my neighbor right now. And that's the thing about the Smartless podcast is very similar to what you're doing here. They started that they're three friends and they just started during COVID to keep in touch with each other, and they would just chat, and then they would invite a celebrity guest on every time, and they'd try to surprise each other. And they just happen to be celebrities, so it's easy for them, right? So now they have this huge podcast.
Yeah.
But the idea of their podcast, Sharua, is like what you're doing, which is this casual conversation. It doesn't have to have a beginning or an end, or it's just you're talking. And that's what I think people love about it, because they're getting these celebrities on here, and you're seeing this side of celebrities that nobody gets to see.
Yeah.
And that's what we were doing. I think I mentioned to you I'd been doing a podcast for a while with my buddy Brian, who was our tour manager with the Dollyrots for a long time. We did a podcast called On the Bus for a little while, and the idea of that was we were talking with all my musician friends, not about hey, what inspired that song, and all the same questions they get that
Right.
you get as a band. It was like, we're not doing those questions. We're gonna have a conversation. We're gonna talk about your adventures on the road. And the on the bus thing was more like, all right, I don't need to know about what you're doing in the studio. I want to hear what it's like on the road. Like when you get on that bus after your show or before your show, like what is life like? Like I think about all the crazy adventures we had on the bus, and how much fun that was. Like we shared a bus with Bowling for Soup a couple tours, and they're the funniest guys and they're the nicest guys, and they have all these crazy things that they do, these inside things. But number one, they only drink Miller Lite. Jarrett can't tell you why. He's like, I don't know. We just picked it one year and that was it. And then all we would drink was Miller Lite. And so it's always Miller Lite. But if you're on the bus, there's a cooler always, they're always stocked with the cooler and with Miller Lite. But if you're the closest to the beer cooler, anybody on the bus can go like this. They'll go like this, right? And if whoever hears it and is next to the cooler has to grab a beer and hand it to them.
Wow.
And that's the kind of stuff that we wanted to hear about, right? Because you don't hear
Yeah.
about that stuff in normal days, in normal stuff. So
And
the
those are
point
always
that I
the
was
more
trying to get
memorable
at,
moments too, I'd imagine. The
yeah,
small like things that was just like the inside jokes of you and your band and along the
you're
road.
it's so insular, and like I couldn't even get my wife to come on the bus when we're on tour. Like we would have certain stops, and like she lived in New York when I met her, and so we were playing New York, and I'm like, you should come out and come to the show, which she loves to do. But then I'm like, come on the bus, come hang out with us before the show, and she's like, no. Mm-mm. I'm like, why? She's like, no, it's so weird. You guys are so insular. You have all these inside jokes. And I'm like, and we were all the nicest guys and would always try to make anyone feel totally comfortable. But no matter what, if you were an outsider, even my wife, she just was like, I can't do it.
Yeah.
So but anyway, we started on that subject because the idea is it's just people being people, right? And
Yeah.
that's, I think, what's great about, what you're doing with your podcast too, is you're getting an honest conversation with people, and getting stories, I think, from all walks of life. But I love getting the stories from people that you wouldn't normally hear.
That's
We
definitely true. Yeah.
Yeah, we used when we were in England, we wanted grilled cheese, and we didn't have. This is we at one point we started bringing a panini press on tour with us so we could make sandwiches. But before that, we all wanted grilled cheese, and we didn't have a way to do it. So Chris Burney from Bowling for Super, somebody grabbed our merch girl's like flat straightener for her hair and started making a grilled cheese. Put butter on it and started making a grilled cheese with her hair straightener, and then of course that devolved into like straightening other parts of the body hair that nobody would want.
Oh
And
no.
she flips out, of course. You guys rode bikes, just that kind of crazy stuff.
Yeah, those are fun
Always
stories.
fun. That's
Yeah.
the inside joke stuff that my wife didn't want to have anything to do with.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't blame her. So I think you mentioned before that straight out of high school, you were looking at going on tour. Like you had this high school band and you were talking about the different stages. So did you
Yeah.
really like start going on tour as soon as you were out of high school or what?
No, I've always like kind of gone, I've kind of like had little phases. So in high school I played in punk bands, and we wouldn't tour, but we would go play. I grew up in Michigan in this little town called Grand Haven, and my high school band was called the Jimmy Hoffa Experience, which was awesome. Instead of the Jimi Hendrix Experience, the Jimmy Hoffa
Yeah, yeah.
Experience. And we would like load up all of our gear, my drum set, our amps, all in the back of my station wagon. I had a 1981 Capri Classic station wagon. It was banana yellow with wood paneling on the side. And bald tires, the speedometer didn't work, the struts were blown. We would pile all our gear and like 7 people in the station wagon, and we'd drive an hour or 2 hours across the state. In fact, we played Ann Arbor.
Oh, really?
We played a house party in Ann Arbor when I was in high school, and it was
Oh, that's
so
sick.
fun. And we crashed on somebody's floor, after the party. Such a good time. But we would drive from Grand Haven to like Ann Arbor or Michigan State or like Kalamazoo. We'd play all those shows. And so that was high school. And then my bandmates were older than me, so a few of them went to Grand Valley College, Grand Valley University,
Yeah.
and we kept the band together for a little while. Then our singer like took off for NYU, and so then we were a 3-piece and we changed our name. So we stuck together for a while. Then finally I went to college, and I wasn't playing in a band in college for a while. I was actually so I'm the thing about me that I think I'm grateful for is I have a million other things that I would love to do. So like stepping away from music wasn't the end of the world for me. So when I went to college, I was doing ski team for our college. I was ski racing, which was awesome. I loved it, and that was all I cared about while I was in college for the most part. And then halfway through college, I was like, screw this, I'm out of here. I moved to Colorado to be a ski bum because I didn't want to be in college anyway, and I never wanted to be there. Like I went to Western. I went to Western
Oh
Michigan,
yeah, yeah, I know
two
Western.
and a half years. So I took off early. I went out to Colorado, moved in with my childhood friend, and we ski bumped for a season. And then I moved down to Boulder, and then I was in Denver. And so this was like, oh, let's see, 97, I moved to Colorado. And from 97 to 2000, I wasn't doing anything with music. I was doing, you're going to laugh, but I was doing some modeling in Denver
Nice.
and like some commercial stuff, like
Yeah.
audition, like doing more acting, modeling stuff. So then I decided in 2000 I wanted to move to LA to be an actor. I had a buddy, my best friend in the world, who's an actor. I had a couple of friends that are actors, and my best friend in the world had booked a show called the Chris Isaak Show. Chris Isaak's a musician, and they put a show out about. And this was when The Sopranos was on HBO, and they were trying to Showtime was trying to do a similar thing. So they had the Chris Isaak Show. So my best friend in the whole world got a recurring part on that, and he moved to Vancouver to shoot that, and then he was living in LA off season. So he's like, "Come on out and live with me, and we'll get you set up." And so that's what I did. I moved to LA in 2000, and he got me set up, and I got my headshots and started taking acting classes. And then like 2 months into being there, I ran into an old friend from Western Michigan, and he's like, "Oh yeah, my wife and I are trying to find a drummer for our punk band, blah blah blah." And I was like, "Hey man, you forgot I'm a drummer." And so that was when I joined Bang Sugar Bang. So
Oh,
we
nice.
created that name together, and we stuck with that name because Bang Sugar Bang was available on the World Wide Web. And I was like, "Are we Bang Sugar Bang?" And they're like, "Yeah." so so that started that off, and then that turned everything in. So it was like a course of like from high school till when I was in Bang Sugar Bang was probably 95, about a 5-year span
Yeah.
of like not having played.
Yeah, I mean, it's cool that you have so many different interests too. I kind of feel the same way sometimes that
Yeah.
I wish I could live like 100 parallel lives at the same time and just try like so many different things.
Right?
But at the end of the day, you come back to kind of the thing that's maybe lived as a dream for a while for you, maybe that you're playing these bands in high school and after trying all these things, going to college, skiing for a
Yeah.
while, moving to Colorado, you're like, you find yourself back at maybe the thing that is really meant for you.
I agree. And I think life goes in all of these phases, and then you get into it. Like when you get older, like me, people always joke about your midlife crisis, but like I'm not having a midlife crisis, but you start to have nostalgia for the things of the past when you get older, and it goes in waves, right? So lately, my nostalgia has been for the time that I lived in Colorado and was like out in the mountains and how awesome that was. And I was watching the Coach Prime documentary with the Buffalo. I don't know if you've seen that or not, but the Colorado Buffaloes football program.
No, I haven't seen it.
Um, Deion Sanders was a Dallas Cowboy. He's amazing. He's coaching their team and he was trying to turn their program around. And actually, one of my good friends that married my best friend from high school, um, he went to CU. He met her at CU, and he went to CU because the Buffaloes had been really good in the early '90s, mid '90s, and then they were awful forever. And then he went to U of M for grad school because he wanted a good football program to root for. Anyway, I'm watching Coach Prime and I'm seeing all these boulder shots of like the Flatirons and all the mountains, and I'm like getting all nostalgic for like, oh man, I loved my time in Boulder. It was so amazing to be 19, 20 years old and just be out there having this crazy adventure and and just having these memories. And then and then it shifts to, and this is awful because I'm watching the wildfire coverage in LA, which is
Yeah.
also scary because we have a bunch of friends that have been misplaced out there and or
Oh, man.
displaced, and not misplaced, displaced. um and and that's hard enough to deal with, but then you're seeing all these places that you're so used to and that you spent all this time. I spent 16 years out there and it was home, and it's like crazy to see all this footage of places that I remember. Altadena, I spent time there all the time. It's gone. Like the Pacific Palisades is on Sunset, and I remember driving that all the time, right through the Palisades, past the high school. There was a Gelson's Market and a Bank of America, and it's gone. Like
Wow.
that Bank of America and Gelson, their entire downtown strip, which wasn't huge, but it was like a little strip of stores and stuff, just gone. Um, but anyway, then you start having these memories because it comes back to you, and you're like, oh my God, I used to drive through there all the time. It just goes in waves. It just goes in waves. So getting the office together and putting all my old memories of the band together, I did this about 4 years ago, and I was in a big kick of like, resurgence of feeling like I missed the band, and would I go back, and wouldn't it be fun to go back on tour? And then I realized, well, I'm 47 years old. It might not be. It might not be as fun as I used
Yeah.
to used to think. So
Well, at least you got that experience. Like, 'cause I talk to so many people that are love rock music. They're like, I want to start a band. We should start a band, and it kind of just ends right there, like conversation. But I think the
yeah.
ability for you to not only say that this is a dream of mine, but making it reality and having the adventure of a life that you've been blessed to experience. And I mean, another question that comes to my mind just talking to you about this is that I feel like people have so many limitations when they think about the things they want to achieve, and it seems that you were able to kind of follow what your intuition was telling you without much fear that, okay, like you felt that maybe college isn't for you, let's go to Colorado, and you're able to kind of decide that let's see what this is like. Your intuition is kind of guiding you. And then whether it's going back to rock music and making music with the Dollyrots and Bang Sugar Bang. And it seems like you've always been able to follow your intuition, even if it doesn't make logical sense in the moment. So how have you been able to um, maybe overcome those limitations that your brain
Yep.
kind of creates?
Part of it is called being totally a ADHD. Um, no, I was always, my mom always joked with me, like, she's like, you never wanted to listen to anybody. You had to do it yourself. And it didn't matter if you got the same answer, like from what we were telling you before you even did it. You wouldn't take anyone's word for it until you did it yourself. Right. So I just never, you're absolutely right. I was, what's the word we use for this? Um, oh God, what is it? Like impulsive, right? Like I
Mm.
was impulsive enough to like just not even think about consequence, right? I remember um I remember doing like I remember writing a check for rent in college, which was maybe $140 for my rent. We were in this little apartment in Kalamazoo, and I shared a room with my buddy, and I paid like $145 a month for rent, which is insane. I wrote him a check in crayon one time. like, like I
Why
just
crayon?
didn't.
You
I
got a
was almost so
pencil?
childlike. I didn't care. Like I was like, well, here, you know. And I didn't care if I had a place to sleep the next night. It's really weird, and I don't know where it came from, but I never had fear about whether it was going to be okay or not. And
It's
so
nice.
I just never. and I would hear other people be like, well, I got to get good grades. I got to go to good school. And I was like, whatever, dude, I don't care. I'll just go wherever. And my intuition, you're exactly right. I would go where my gut told me to go. And what would happen was, as I say this to my wife all the time, I'm like, it's going to be okay. You just got to have a little bit of faith. And she's like, what do you mean it's going to be okay? And I'm like, I don't know how, and I can't tell you right now, but I know it's going to be okay. I'll meet you there. I'll get there. Um, sorry, they're going to dinner, and I had already made plans with the neighbors to tell
Yeah.
them I'd just meet them after we were done talking. So don't worry.
Okay.
Um, so, um, so anyway, no, I'll feed her. Sorry,
No worries,
I'll
fam.
meet you there. I can. I'll figure it out. So, anyway, I just never had. I just always kind of went, and this is weird, but it kind of went where the wind blew. It wasn't where the wind blew me, but I always felt like I knew what was the right thing to do at the time. Whether it was going to set me up for success in the long run or not, I didn't think about it. I just knew that this is what I wanted. And then all of a sudden, like, I remember being at Western and feeling like, I don't know if school's for me. I don't know if I'd broken up with a girlfriend, and I was like, I don't know if this is for me. And then next thing I know, I'm talking to my friend in Colorado, and she's like, oh man, we should just take a semester off and be ski bums. And I was like, okay. And so she's like, are you serious? I'm like, yeah. So we started looking, and 2 months later I was out in Colorado, and then I did that for a while, and then I was all excited about skiing, and then the whole skiing thing was exciting, and then I was down in Denver, and then my buddy got his show, and he was like, I'm gonna be in LA, you should come out here. And I was like, okay. And so I just went. And then I mean, I remember going to Vegas with my friends, like, and spending every dime I had left, and rent was due like in a week, and I just would go to Vegas and spend the money in Vegas instead of rent, and have no idea how I was going to pay rent. And then somehow I would figure it out. Like, it's nice when you don't have anyone relying on you except yourself. You know what I mean? Like, you can just do those things. And I always tell people at that age, like, do it while you're young. Seriously, do it while you're young, because you don't have the responsibility and you're not tied down to things. Just go have your adventures and do it, and have a blast, and worry about it later. don't do don't do dangerous things. Don't be stupid, but, like, don't put yourself in a position to end up living under a bridge. You know what I mean? Like, stuff like
Yeah.
that. I was never on the cusp of anything like that, because I knew I always had friends and family that would take me in if they needed to. But which sounds like I was on the edge. I wasn't that much on the edge. I was just impulsive. You know what I mean? Like, um, but I think that's the age to do it. You go out and sow your oats and have a good time, and take it in. When you're in your 20s, you think you're on top of the world, and you think you know everything. And I look back at myself, I'm like, oh my God, I had so much, I had I had so much confidence. So, um, give me 1 second. Sorry, hang on 1 second.
No
Okay.
worries.
I'll be right back. Sorry. I already told Sandra that I'd meet you guys there because I have to finish up. So I will get there. Sorry.
Oh yeah, no worries. I think it's really cool that for the most part you're able to keep this impulsive nature, this carefree nature, and let it take you on the adventure of life. But have you ever found yourself either making a decision that led you to somewhere where you really started to freak out? Like, have you ever felt like in a lot of fear in a moment? Can you remember any moment like that or?
I I never I always had a good sense of what was right and what was wrong. So I don't think I used to say this, and I didn't know how to explain it, but you're in college now. Have you ever have you ever ended up in someone's dorm room at your college where you're like, this is not me. Like, this is not my these aren't my people. I don't know how to explain it. I remember being in, like, a
Yeah.
dorm room and feeling like, okay, this is not my world. Right? It might have been, and this is the 90s, like, maybe they're smoking a bong or something like that. And I was, I wasn't an angel, but I wasn't like, I didn't have a bong in my dorm room. And, like, so I often was smart enough to keep myself out of trouble in those ways. I remember being in high school, they had a thing called the Catalina Club, which was the girls synchronized swimming, but they would do these amazing things, and then the guys, we would do these sketches in between. the synchronized swimming, and it was like my most favorite thing to do every year. It was like basically doing Saturday Night Live in a pool, right? So so the first night I go there to do it, I'm all excited, and then my idiot friends that were doing it with me, I go in the locker room and they're all getting wasted in the locker room and like jumping in the pool. I'm like, you idiots! Like you're gonna get so much trouble. But I didn't say that to them. I just said, "Oh, guys, I'm sorry, I can't make it tomorrow night," because I knew they were gonna get busted. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So of course they did. And then the next thing I know is my mom got the report from one of the parents that was like, "Oh, I heard that Chris had this good sense to say that he wasn't going to get involved in that, blah, blah, blah." And then, of course, I look like an angel, but I'm, not necessarily. But I just always had good luck like that. And I think it was because I could sense trouble. And I'm not truly trouble. I like to get in some good trouble, but I could always sense when it wasn't a good situation. So
That's good.
yeah, like I drove a cab in LA for a little while. I drove a checkered cab for a little while in LA. And that was some rock bottom times because I was like trying to pay bills, but you had to pay rent on the cab every week and you had to drive a certain amount. And I was like I was remember just like being strung, being like, "Oh my God, I'm driving this cab 12 hours a day. This is
Uh,
hell. How does anybody do this?" And that was when I started to kind of think like maybe this is not a great, that's when you start questioning. And of course, but before it got too bad, I asked my bandmate for a referral and she got me a job at the restaurant she was working at, and then things changed quick. So
nice.
um yeah, no, I never ended up in a situation where I didn't feel like there was no out. You know what I mean? Where there was no exit plan. I don't know how to explain it. But I think part of it is that you just trust it and you go with the flow. And it's hard to, I mean, going with the flow, it's actually hard to fail sometimes because you're just, if you don't have expectations, you know what I mean? Like if you don't have a plan to veer from, then you don't have a measurement to say I'm failing. So
That's true. Yeah, it's really fun to talk to you about this because I feel like this lesson of trying to follow my intuition more has been one that I've taken recently because I feel like historically I've always struggled with when my mind decides something is true, then I have to follow it. And
yeah.
then I would, even if in my heart I felt that I should do something, I would always logically convince myself otherwise. And I kind of, that overthinkingness would always cause me to suffer a lot from that. And I think
Mm.
recently I've thought about maybe my intuition is smarter than the logic that my brain kind of convinces me of that it's so important. And I think as I've started to follow my intuition more and sort of think through like, okay, even though I this might make logical sense, like doing what I feel like, let's try that out. I found that my life quality has actually improved because I think a lot of times your core has this kind of intelligence that it's kind of hard to kind of hard to explain, like what kind of goes on in the subconscious mind. But I think there is some kind of intelligence there, and I think following it can add like a different element of a liveliness to someone's life.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah, and it's I just had a thought and I kind of lost it, but I
Happens
I
all the
think
time.
yeah, I think just I know what it was. So when it was time to graduate high school, my brother, who's a pilot now, he's a captain at Southwest, he took a gap year and he worked in a factory. And and he realized very quickly what he wanted to do because he worked in the factory and he realized very quickly that's where he didn't want to be, right? After he was like, I need an education because I don't want to do this. I graduated high school and I was like, I don't want to go to college yet. I wanted to take a gap year, or what I really told my parents was I want to go to Colorado. I want to go to school in Colorado. And the answer was no, you're going to stay in state because tuition's better. And I just kind of said, okay. But then I think I realized very quickly after 2.5 years that I was like, why didn't I just do what I wanted to do? Like, at least I made my parents happy for a little bit. And then I was like, you know what? My gut's been telling me to go to Colorado. I'm going to Colorado. like, I'm not making the same mistake again just because my parents said that that's what I had to do, because they were supporting me, which I get. But then it's like, all right, well, thank you for supporting me. I'm going to go do this on my own and I'll make it work. So,
Yeah.
so you want to make your parents happy. You want to make people feel proud of you. And I know parents worry, but you got to take your own journey. And the interesting thing is, I remember my mom thinking the band was like a phase. Oh, it's just a phase. She would treat it like it's just a phase. He's gonna. But the reality is, being in those bands made me more of an adult and the human that I am today than anything else. I learned more about taking care of myself from being in those bands than I would have learned anywhere else. Because there was so much that went into it. You know, you're going from town to town. You had to make sure you had a place to stay. You had to make sure you called the venue. You had to have enough gas money. I mean, it was a lot of responsibility. Otherwise, you're stuck in the middle of the country in some town you don't know and far from anyone you know. And you grow up real quick. You grow
Wow.
up in a weird way because, like, in being in a band, you almost get this Peter Pan effect where you don't have to grow up, but then you grow up and you get more responsible, I should say.
That's interesting. So you
So
feel like it wasn't until you were in the band where you started to feel like you developed a sense of responsibility and adulthood characteristics.
yeah, yeah, totally.
That's
Like,
cool.
especially once you have once you get to the point where you have like a tour manager and you got roadies and you got a merch person and literally all you're doing is getting on a bus, they're driving you to the next venue, you wake up, you go to sound check, you play your show, and then like you don't have any, you don't even you're not even responsible for getting yourself to the next town because your tour manager's like, okay, everybody off the bus, it's time to go do this and this and that, and everybody is like giving you everything you possibly could need. You walk in stage, your drums are already set up, and you're like, oh great, here, you just sit down behind your drums and do your sound check, and it's
Did it still
crazy.
feel like an adventure? Like, was it still enjoyable when so much of the
Yes.
responsibility was taken off you?
Yes, it was different, but it was exciting for me because I felt like we had gotten to a point of success that was really cool for me.
Yeah.
That we'd achieved enough where we had and the roadies and the merch people were like as much a part of the family, and they made things so much more fun. It was awesome. It was just such a fun crew to have, like, everybody was like a big family on tour, and so the more the merrier was kind of the kind of way it worked. But I remember sitting in the front of the bus with the bus driver overnight drives sometimes because I'd been so used to driving our van and trailer that I would just go sit with the bus driver at the front of the bus and just watch the country go by because I it was a point where I'm like, you don't know where you wake up and you're in another town. You have, like I said, you got to figure out where you are. And I'm like, I didn't even see anything in between here and there. So I would go sit with the bus driver. One tour in England, we had a double decker bus. They always have double deckers because it's more narrow. So all of our bunks were up above, but my bunk was right in the front of the bus, and I had an awesome window. I could just lay there and watch the countryside as he drove. So that was awesome. It was so fun to see.
Wow, that sounds so
Yeah,
beautiful.
it was
Um,
cool.
yeah, I've always wanted to visit Colorado in particular too. I've heard so much about it, all those the 14 footers and 14
Yeah,
footers and
14ers.
everything. Yeah, I don't know how
Yeah,
much my dad told you, but we're big into hiking, so that's always been a destination we've wanted to go to.
nice. You want to get to Pikes Peak and go to Estes Park, I'm guessing. That's probably one of
I
your
haven't done enough
spots.
reading, but
Yeah.
whatever the tallest peak.
So Rocky Mountain National Park is right outside of Estes Park there in Colorado, and Pikes Peak is there. That's a 14er. And
Oh,
there's a bunch of them. But anyway, Pikes Peak's an easy one because you can stay in Denver and
yeah.
then drive up to Estes Park from there. So put it on your list.
I'll make sure I write that down. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very doable. A lot of people that's a 14er that's very doable because you're
Okay.
starting at a higher elevation anyway. So it's
How
not
many
as
miles? Do
difficult.
you know how many miles that is, or
Oh man, I remember people saying that they would leave at like dusk and they'd have to hike for like 3 or 4 hours to get to the top, and then it was three,
oh,
four
that's
hours
it?
back down.
It
Yeah,
only took that
yeah,
long? Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because you're starting at such a high elevation to begin
That's
with.
true. Yeah. Makes
Yep.
sense. Cool.
Yeah, because you could drive through Estes Park and get yourself to the hiking trail, the base of the hiking trail, and you didn't have that much to go.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I'll
So
definitely make sure to, if I do go, I'll let you know about
yeah,
that. Amazing.
nice man.
So,
Yeah, I
in
want to
your
hear all about it.
opinion, yeah, in your opinion, and I know you can add some of your own bias into this question, but who do you think are some of the best rock bands of all time?
So some of my favorites, I don't know if they're the best or not, but some of my favorites. I love Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm a punk rock drummer, and I've loved punk rock bands, and I'm gonna name some punk rock bands too. But like bands like Pink Floyd, they're just unbelievable. I mean, just their concept records. I like stuff where the singer sounds like they could lose their mind at any minute. Like Pink Floyd was
Yeah.
definitely one of those bands. Um, Green Day is one of my favorite bands of all
Green Day
time.
is great. Yeah.
I just love them. I know your dad was saying that you're a big fan of Green Day too,
Green Day
right?
is great. I think they're just
Yeah.
such a groovy kind of vibe that it's always like fun to listen to them.
They're awesome, and they, like I said, they've been around since the Lookout Records days. And I was telling your dad this; it's an interesting story because they did two records on Lookout, right? They actually did an EP vinyl
Yeah,
first, and
which
then
two
they put
records were
out.
those? It was
So 1039 Smooth was one of them, and then the
yeah,
other one was Kerplunk.
Kerplunk, yeah. Right.
Yep. And then they got signed to Reprise after that. But and 1039 Smooth and Slap It, it was like they combined an LP and an EP onto the CD because they'd released like a little 7-inch vinyl. But they did that all on Lookout Records in Berkeley, and they used to play this place called Gilman Street, 924 Gilman, which is like punk. That's where Operation Ivy came from. Are you familiar with Operation
I've
Ivy?
heard of them. Yeah.
Yeah, if you haven't listened to them, they're from the same scene Green Day came out of, and do
Yeah.
yourself a favor, they're amazing. And they
Yeah.
became
I'll give
Rancid.
them a listen.
So the guys from Operation Ivy ended up becoming Rancid. So
Got it.
without some members, but they're incredible. And then Green Day, obviously being a punk band. No Effects, who I mentioned before from the Bay Area, is one of my favorite punk bands of all time.
Mhm.
Buzzcocks, who we toured with, I think are incredible bands. Oh God, U2, I just think
Yeah.
they're amazing. Um, Weezer, I love. They're one of my favorites. I'm all over, I'm all over the place. My latest that I'm really excited about is a guy named Paul Coffin, who's actually like a
Okay.
country guy. I don't know if you've heard of
Interesting.
him or not.
I don't think so.
Paul Coffin, and he's like almost like a funk country guy. He's like a young guy, but he's got this real deep, cool voice, and he's awesome. I just love him. Um, but yeah, I'm like I said, I'm all over the place, and so AC Phil Rudd from ACDC, I love his
Yeah.
drumming.
Amazing.
His name is Phil, but he doesn't play any fills on the drums. Like he's just like four on the floor, like just plays. And that's what I always did with the Dollyrots Bang Sugar Bang. I just played what the music needed and not much more. You know, I was never the drummer who was like flipping his sticks in the
Yeah.
air and like I would never take my shirt off to go play drum. I was like, nope, sorry, I'm not that guy. Like,
Fair
I
enough.
didn't have the cheese factor for it, you know.
Hmm.
But I'm all over. I mean, like when I think about it, like Pink Floyd, I always want to listen to. Uh, there's a band called Fun. Do you like the band Fun?
I don't think I've heard of
They
Fun.
sang uh set the world on fire.
Yeah, I've heard that song. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. They're all their stuff's really good. Beyond that song, they got a ton of good stuff. And again, he's got a really good, his voice is really good.
yeah.
So
I think Pink Floyd's a good pick as your first one because I listened
yeah.
to I think the first time I listened to Dark Side of Moon I was like on a walk at nighttime, so it was even more surreal to
Yeah, yeah,
experience it. I was definitely not expecting there to be like such a low amount of vocals on that album, but I think it
yeah,
worked out perfectly the way it did. It's like a it
yeah.
really takes you somewhere.
And if you listen to them in headphones too, there's so much you hear that you don't even
Oh
realize
yeah,
is on that record.
definitely.
So I don't
Amazing.
know if you can hear my dog barking in the background, but I
I can't.
apologize
No,
because
no, I
she's
can't hear it at
being
all. You're
okay.
fine.
Good, that's awesome because she's sitting there barking, trying to she's 15 years old and she's losing her mind, and so she thinks that we left her alone, and she's probably barking at the
Uh,
front door, thinking we all left her. So
yeah.
so anyway,
Yeah. Yeah, but it's a
uh,
good collection. I think Dookie is probably one of the best rock albums I've heard. It's
oh
quite
dude,
a
Dookie is
classic.
a classic. I'm
Yeah.
gonna let my dog in
Can't
real
go
quick.
wrong.
Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Take your time.
Dookie is absolutely a classic. I love that record. Um, they redid Welcome to Paradise on that record. It was on Kerplunk,
Yeah.
and I loved that song, and I'm so glad they redid it on Dookie. And yeah, I mean that put them on the map. Obviously, out that like skyrocketed them from like punk, like unknown punk kind of to like the huge band. And then they had that kind of lull. And then of course when American Idiot came out, it was like,
Mhm. Yeah, that was a
whew,
good album too.
that's a story. I got a story for you on that one if you want to hear it. Like
Really?
so Green Day skyrocketed with that, and Lookout Records was still managing their back catalog with Kerplunk and 1039. Well, the problem was that American Idiot had gotten so huge that Lookout couldn't facilitate the back catalog. They were just couldn't keep up with the demand for it, right? So basically, Green Day is like, "Hey, you've violated our contract agreement, you know, and we're pulling our catalog, and it's not yours anymore." And so Green Day took it back, and they put it out on their own label called Adeline Records. So this was about the time we were working on our second album. The Dollyrots were working on the Because I'm Awesome album, and had a a development deal, they call it, with Universal Music. So Universal was giving the Dollyrots money to go record, and we kept bringing songs back to them, and they're like, I don't know, and like they were scared to pull the trigger on it. So then we ended up with almost a full album, and Universal had to either pick up the option or not. And Universal was like, no, we're not going to pick up the option. But the deal was, if they didn't pick up the option, we got to keep the masters for it and the recordings, and we didn't have to pay for it. So they didn't pick up the option. So then the album belonged to us. We didn't pay for it, which is awesome. But then Lookout Records was like, sorry, we're folding. Green Day pulled their catalog because we were just going to put it on Lookout if Universal didn't want it. And then Lookout's like, sorry, we're folding. We can't do it. And they were like, oh my God. So that summer on Warped Tour, Dollyrots are on Warped Tour and Joan Jett's there. And at the end of the summer, Kelly handed Joan Jett the CD, the finished, and she's like, "This record's finished. It just doesn't have a home, and we'd really like you to listen and consider it," because Joan has the Blackheart Records label. And so, a couple weeks later, they called Kelly and Lewis and we're like, "Yep, we're putting your record out. Let's do it."
Amazing.
Isn't that cool? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we've always been flying in Green Day's kind of orbit, like, and I've used like their drum tech would always drum tech for me when we would record. He did all of our merch for the Dollyrots, and he did the Green Day merch and stuff. And actually I don't know if he was the same guy, but the guy that drew the cover to Dookie, he also drew some stuff. We've met him a million times, and there was a baseball player on the Oakland A's called Raleigh Fingers, and he had this crazy mustache. So the guy that drew the cover to Dookie drew us a Raleigh Fingers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so we still have that. Lewis and Kelly still have it framed, but
yeah, there's always some similarities I can kind of see sometimes with artwork. Like I see the one on your left with
yeah,
that one it reminds me a lot of Dookie.
yeah,
Yeah.
the bunny in the gas mask, right?
Yeah.
It's totally, you're right. It's so it's
It's
very
the same
similar.
vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like
That was
one.
our guy, buddy of ours down in LA that did that. This guy named
Amazing.
Sean, who's awesome. But yeah, so we were always flying in their orbit, and then like Mike Dirnt came to a Bang Sugar Bang show one night because his friend Billy Bones was from LA and was hanging out in our scene, and so he brought Mike Dirnt, and Mike Dirnt was hanging out with me the whole night, buying me drinks and like hanging out in our dressing room, and we were like best buds. And I was too scared to be like, "Hey man, give me your number, let's hang out," because I was in awe of him instead of owning it and being like, "Hey dude, I'm cool too, let's hang out." So, but I would run into them, and like Trey Cool came up to the Dollyrots, and I wasn't there, it was Luce and Kelly, but he came up to them in South by Southwest one night. I was somewhere else that night. We had played our show and somehow we'd split up. And of course, the night we split up, then Trey Cool came up to them and was like gushing about, we have a song called California Beach Boy. And he's like, "I put it on my girlfriend's mix and I love that song." We're like, oh my God. But they never asked us on tour. They never asked. And like, I'm like, I wish they would. And they never have. But my deal with Luce and Kelly is if they ever do, then I get to go back out on and do that tour with them. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so I don't think it's going to happen at this point, and I don't think it'll ever happen. But
That's all right. I mean, what adventures are you on these days outside of the rock scene?
so my outlet now is playing soccer. Believe it or not,
Oh, I read about
I
that in
play
your bio.
soccer every Thursday night in my old man league, the over 40 league. I'm on a team called Super Good, and I'm on another team. We have a co-ed team as well called Super CFC, which is Super Co-ed Football Team or Co-ed Football Club. So that's my like so 2 nights a week I play soccer. That is my total outlet. I love it. And then we play and then we go out for beers afterwards, and that's our social club as well. And so I do that, a lot of that. In the winter here in Wisconsin, we're skiing. We just got back from the slopes today. We were out skiing with the kids, and it was a beautiful sunny day. We were out skiing, having a good time. And I'm going out to Colorado or actually Utah next month to ski with my soccer buddies. We're going to Park City for a little visit. And so I don't have a big outlet as far as like music goes. My drums are set up in the basement. I don't play them very often. I was doing the podcast with Brian. That was a good creative outlet, but I want to get that back up and going. He got busy and I got busy, and and then lo and behold, we stopped doing it for a while. So we'll see if we can get that back up and running. And then I always have these ideas for like sketches that I want to do, and I have a whole list of sketches, and I keep saying to myself, let's just put them on YouTube and just see what happens. Let's just do it. So I'm trying to get my friends, my buddies in Chicago, and a couple other friends together to shoot a few stupid things that I want to put up on YouTube. That'll be my creative outlet.
Yeah.
But yeah, other than that, I'm like a normal Midwestern middle-aged dad now. I have a 9 to 5 job during the week. That's a nice, real nice gig. It's a good way to support the family that I wasn't sure I'd ever know how to do that or have the option to do that after all my years in music. But I've been very lucky to have landed in a great position for that. So, It's pretty basic nowadays.
Really amazing. But you're still
But
having, looks like you're still having a lot of fun. I mean, I'm glad that you've been able to find like other ways to kind of access that creative outlet that you've been looking for.
I'm having a lot of fun through my kid too, because she's an adventurer. So we go and do these like high ropes courses and zip lines together, and we do all kinds of fun stuff together. She's an adventurer for sure. So
Amazing.
yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah. Well, Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to come sit down today. I had lot of fun talking to you, learning
Yeah.
about your life stories, hearing about the stories on tour. A lot that I haven't heard about before. I've never ever talked to someone who's been on tour and had experience like you have. So it's been a pleasure talking
Yeah.
to you.
Yeah, thanks, man. No, it's been really fun, Troy. I appreciate you bringing me on because it's been a while since I've sat down. Sorry, my stupid dog is barking. It's been a long time since I've sat down and had a nice, done a podcast thing. And we used to do so much press for the band and all that stuff, and it's just been years since I've really been the guest on anything. I was always hosting, but I do love doing this. I love sitting down and talking clearly. So thanks for having me. Happy to come back any day. And then if I get on the bus back up and running, we'll have to collaborate. I'll have to bring you
Of
on
course,
and
yeah. Let me know.
talk
We'll
about your
figure it out.
adventures.
Of course, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Try. Take care, buddy.
You as well.
Thanks, man.
If you enjoyed that episode, then I guarantee that you'll enjoy this episode right here. Make sure you click here to watch that episode, and the best way to support us is to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to hit the notification bell as well. It is the best way to support us, and it'll help us to keep growing, get better guests, better production, and make this the best podcast in the world.